News 7 tonight, the News 7 investigators uncover the inner workings of a worldwide network of churches, which ex-members say ripped apart their lives, their families, and their finances.
These churches are expanding right now all over Massachusetts. Hank Phillippi Ryan is here to explain how they're using the power of faith to control current members and recruit new people who don't always know what they're getting into.
Margie, the people who revealed their story all consider themselves Christians. But what our investigation found is that their strong faith has been manipulated to support what is actually a huge church franchise. Some victims described it as a religious bait and switch, with families being destroyed as a result of blind faith.
Pretty girls.
There's Kirsten. Kirsten's 6.5 now.
Patty Heap can only see her grandchildren on videotape these days, though they live only 5 miles away.
This is Abigail. This is the baby.
The table in her family room where the kids once played is empty. Her grandchildren aren't allowed to visit her anymore. That's because they've been taught Patty Heap is possessed by the devil.
And the reason?
Is this church. It's this group. It's their hatred of anybody outside of their group.
Patty Heap lost her grandchildren because she's on the outside. When the girls and their mother Terry joined Potter's House Church, Patty would not.
The spirit will come and paralyze.
Potter's House bills itself as born-again evangelical. We took these surveillance pictures and obtained an audio tape because Pastor Steve Johnson would not allow our cameras inside.
And all the devil attacks that came through with the emotional stroke that was taking place at this present time.
Now Patty's son Doug is inside for one reason only. Pastor Johnson has given him the disturbing ultimatum: join the church or lose your children.
Believe me, I have good, deep religious beliefs. I believe that if I don't do what I'm told, I'm never going to see my kids again.
And our investigation shows Potter's House is not the only church on the Cape whose members say their families were threatened and ripped apart. It happens when one family member wants to leave the church and another doesn't.
I had to choose between my parents or church.
And what did you choose?
For a while, I chose the church.
This teenager attended Victory Chapel in South Dennis for 7 years, even after her parents left.
And what did you think would happen to them?
I thought they would go to hell.
She eventually came home and now, with her parents, can only see her old friends on home video. Because the church says you're in or you're out, her old friends pretend she's dead.
And what would you like to tell them about what happened to you?
I tell them all the time, I say, you know, I don't want it to happen to you, it happened to me.
What's it?
Just all the hurt in my family and the hurt to me.
Ed and Alice DaCosta are still hurting. They left the church. Their daughter Karen is still inside.
She's told us that we're not her family anymore, and that we're going to go to hell.
Your daughter says?
Yeah, we're going to go to hell when we die.
Ed and Alice, everyone you heard, all are Christians. But ex-members reveal attending other Christian churches is not acceptable. Here pastors preach, join them or go to hell. And our investigation shows these two Cape churches are actually part of a burgeoning church network. Its goal is to continue its worldwide expansion, and its target is the vulnerable.
You know, I talked to people and I told them my utmost things of my life, and I just feel like I was just raped.
After we left, I really felt like we had been raped.
I was spiritually raped. And I believe that it's one of the most dangerous places you could ever walk into. My mind was completely taken over.
And that, experts say, is how a church can create broken families and broken spirits.
They are a cult, sociologically, psychologically, behaviorally.
And what does that mean for the people in the group?
It means that they are being religiously hoodwinked.
Hoodwinked, ex-members say, by their pastors. Our undercover video shows at Victory Chapel, the pastor is Paul Campo, a high school dropout ex-nightclub musician with no formal religious schooling.
He says that
when I'm standing up here, it's like Jesus Christ is standing up here talking to you.
Paul Campo said that?
Sure.
He said those exact words.
And that's the hold over hundreds of Cape Church members. They believe disobeying Paul Campo or Steve Johnson is disobeying God.
Pastor Johnson, I'm Hank Philippi Ryan from Channel 7.
Right now.
We tried to talk to Pastor Johnson, but he had church members take our pictures as he asked us to leave.
You can't come in and take pictures. You're not allowed.
Pastor Campo hurried into his Victory Chapel office, leaving his assistant to keep us away.
Could you ask Pastor Campo to come out for a minute?
Of course not.
People are held in captive, they're held in fear, they're in bondage, and Jesus Christ died so that we didn't have to live like that anymore. Jesus Christ freed us from all those things, and
Victory Chapel?
Victory Chapel just puts you right back in the handcuffs. He puts you right back there, and it's like Christ died, you know, for nothing.
No current members of the church would talk to us on camera, but what they would say is that they're happy and that the church has changed their lives for the better. That's exactly how ex-members say they once felt too, until they realized the church had taken complete control of their lives. Margie?
And who in the church is in control?
Well, on a local level, the pastor has complete authority, but tomorrow we'll show you that the ultimate control comes from one particular pastor who has created a spiritual and financial pyramid and will follow the money trail all the way to the mother church, and that's in Arizona.
Okay, all right, we'll look for that. Thanks, Hank. Tonight, the News 7 investigators continue their exclusive look into two Cape Cod churches. They're part of a worldwide network that's growing in Massachusetts. Last night, Hank Philippi Ryan showed us how these churches are tearing families apart. Tonight, she follows their money trail.
Margie, we checked into Cape Cod's Victory Chapel and Potter's House churches because former members called us worrying over their families and their finances. Our investigation then showed what was happening to them here at home, the result of blind faith, is controlled thousands of miles away.
Our undercover video in the Cape's Victory Chapel reveals the lure, what looks like the joyous unity of a devout religious congregation. And ex-members will tell you that's what got them in the door. But it was the absolute authority of the pastors, they finally realized, that held them inside. The pastor's authority, however, actually comes from a man thousands of miles away.
Call him by the name of his father.
He preaches in the shadow of the Arizona Red Rock. His Potter's House in Prescott is actually headquarters of a worldwide franchise of Potter's Houses and Victory Chapels. Wayman Mitchell is founder and chairman of the board. And 2 weeks ago, Mitchell had no idea we attended his Sunday service with a hidden camera.
They can't even grasp what God has done.
In this world, Mitchell's message is gospel, and so are his methods.
He's the king. You don't do exactly what he says. As soon as he says it, you're out. You're discredited. You're listening to the devil.
Chris Turner did it Mitchell's way for 10 years, training to be a pastor and tithing thousands of dollars. But when he asked his Flagstaff pastor where the money was going,
I'd toss you right out of that church on here. That's what I would do.
the response was an interrogation from Wayman Mitchell himself. In a phone call, Chris taped.
I asked him if we could look at the book.
Why did you want to do that for?
Because it's my right. I pay my tithe.
No, it's not a right.
Right then, Chris learned, question the church and you've gone too far. He now works for a convenience store instead of preaching the gospel.
Basically, that's why he threw him out. We said, well, he's a rebel.
Paul Reese was on the church council. He admitted Mitchell's church policy forbids financial questions.
Shouldn't someone in the church be allowed to look at the books?
Sure they should.
Person in the church be allowed to know where the money they're donating is going?
Yes, absolutely.
And what was the case in your church?
In our church, no, you couldn't do that.
So the same thing happened to Dave Diver.
I got kicked out as a heretic.
He says he donated close to $60,000, but when he asked to see the books, he was shown the door.
Somebody ought to get to the bottom of where all the money's going, and nobody can or will or won't.
But that's almost impossible, because as our investigation found, in Mitchell's churches, not even the treasurer has access to the church's books. This man should know he was a church treasurer.
The pastor controlled the books. He had control of the checkbook.
You were the treasurer. Why didn't you?
Because I wasn't allowed to.
Now remember, all of Wayman Mitchell's hundreds of churches are run from his headquarters in Prescott, Arizona. So that's where we went for some answers. Mitchell's disciples ordered our photographer to leave, but our hidden camera was still inside.
You're not interested in news, man. Out. You're not interested in news. Out.
Could you take your hands off? Mitchell had no idea what we wanted to ask him, but apparently didn't care. Just like church members who asked about money, we were escorted to the door. We wanted a quick interview with him about what's going on in Boston. Our investigation found church members here at home are asking questions about money too, questions that are causing some to become ex-members. All members put cash in the church collection plate and rarely keep track of the total. But checks written for tithes are accounted for, both in the family's check ledgers and supposedly in church statements.
Where is that money?
But our investigation found the numbers don't always match.
These are the checks we gave for 1989.
Ed and Alice DaCosta know they tithed hundreds of dollars more to the Cape's Victory Chapel than church statements acknowledge. And the same for this ex-Victory Chapel couple. They say they'll be harassed by the church if their faces are shown. But they found a money gap too. And so, they told us, did their friends.
There was at least a half dozen people that said that, you know, they had given more than what their statement had said.
They're fleecing the flock. And that's what they're doing.
What are you?
We're the flock.
Why are you not willing to disclose this?
The Evangelical Association of New England represents 1,200 churches, not Wayman Mitchell's. Officials there recommend independent audits. And they say the question, what's happening with the money, should not be a tough one.
If I have a problem answering that question, I think you would have, some questions for me as to what am I hiding.
You don't want to respond at all.
We tried to ask Victory Chapel's pastor, Paul Campo, why Mitchell's churches do not have independent audits, and about charges of financial impropriety.
The money that you collect, where does that go? You're laughing. There are some other questions that he hung up.
Back in Arizona, where it all began, Dave Diver, his $60,000 unaccounted for, now ruefully regrets what he helped create.
And I'd like to apologize to people in Massachusetts.
Because?
Because I helped start it.
Former church members, both in Massachusetts and in other states, related exactly the same financial experiences to us, but they were afraid to talk about them on camera. They said current church members would make their lives miserable if they did. Margie.
And the current church member is pretty reluctant to talk to you, too.
Yes, absolutely. But it's funny, it's interesting. One of the people who turned us down did send us a fax today, and she said that she was disgusted with our story, and she said that the church does work hard to help people. Now, that's true. People who need help do go to the church with their problems, but some people say they just exchange those old problems for new ones. Now, let me say that tomorrow we will follow the money trail even farther, and insiders will reveal where the money does not go.
Okay, thanks very much, Hank. What happens when the power of faith is focused on fundraising? Tonight we continue the News 7 investigators' exclusive story of an international network of churches that has caused unhappiness and fear for many Cape Cod families. Hank Phillippi Ryan continues her investigation by following the money trail from the Cape all the way to Arizona.
Margie, our story shows what can happen when the road to spiritual salvation takes a wrong turn and leads instead to blind faith. We began looking at Potter's House and Victory Chapel churches on the Cape and found that they and hundreds of others are run by a church headquarters thousands of miles away. The movement is growing right now here in Massachusetts. You may already have seen some church members working to make it grow even faster.
God wants you to be saved!
You may call this intriguing, or street theater, or simply annoying. But what the Victory Chapel churches call it is outreach. Their goal is new members, and street preaching is one way they try to get them. If you haven't been reached out to on the streets, remember the haunted house on the Cape that grabbed so much attention for its graphic abortion scene? That was Victory Chapel outreach too. On the surface, this group appears similar to other born-again fundamentalist churches. But once inside, ex-members tell us, obligations mount. Compulsory attendance, enforced recruitment, and demands for tithing, donation of 10% of everything you earn.
It's a money-making machine. It's based on money. Its whole goal is money. Any way they can bring in money, they manipulate people to do so.
On his family.
For years, this man was an assistant pastor at Cape Cod's Victory Chapel. He revealed how the machine is fueled, in the words of his former boss.
I've heard him say, if you don't tithe, you're going to hell.
You've heard him say what?
If you don't tithe, you're going to hell.
With that as incentive, the church machine becomes extremely well-oiled.
People are tithing on their Social Security checks. People are tithing on their welfare checks. People are tithing on their food stamps.
And you believe that there is a heaven and a hell, right? And you want to please God, and people use this willingness to please God to get what they want.
Here's how the machine works. Remember we said the mother church is in Prescott, Arizona, headed by Pastor Wayman Mitchell. It's the apex of a pyramid. Mitchell started more churches, and those pastors started more churches, and those pastors started more churches. The church says now there are more than 700 of them. Now the money. Each baby church must give 10% to its parent, ending in a windfall for the Prescott headquarters. And the more new churches, the richer it gets at the top. How much money winds up in Prescott? Well, churches are all private and tax exempt, required to report to no one. But in Arizona, a quirky law requires yearly church balance sheets. Our investigation reveals the Mitchell Church balance sheet quadrupled over the past years. But the problem is that's hardly a clear picture.
They're not checked up.
No.
They could really file whatever they wanted.
Absolutely.
Church members are told the money goes for more outreach. One disciple took these home videos of a church-financed crusade in India. And money is also supposed to go to plant baby churches. But the same disciple that took these pictures says that's not how it really works.
Church would raise funds for a minister that is just planted in another city. And I knew those ministers in the other cities, and I knew they weren't getting the money. The congregation would give thousands and thousands of dollars, and that individual would never see that money.
And this former insider at Cape Cod's Victory Chapel described exactly the same thing happening at his church.
He would pull offerings, $10,000, maybe $12,000 in for sending a church overseas, and I'd say maybe only 10 to 15% was used for that.
What was the rest used for?
Oh, buying new equipment, putting carpet in the church. It's basically drawing money from the people and lying to them.
So you're saying that money was raised for one purpose and used for something else?
Exactly.
As we showed you yesterday, our attempts to discuss finances with church officials were rebuffed at every level.
You're not interested in news, man. Out. You're not interested in news. Out.
I'm Hank Philippi Ryan from Channel 7.
I said you can't take pictures.
There are some other questions that he hung up.
God holds them accountable, but also people who give money have an obligation.
Rick Ross works to encourage church members to question church authority.
It amounts to nothing more than spiritual blackmail or a type of extortion. And for a church to be involved in that type of behavior is reprehensible.
Wayman Mitchell, remember the leader of the church worldwide, mentioned Rick Ross in a recent sermon. We were there with a hidden camera.
And the little faggot Rick Ross is cool. We survived all of him and will again. Isn't that right?
As new recruits go in the church doors, some of the disillusioned find their way out. They realize the search to be spiritually strong has made them something else.
Do you consider yourself a victim?
Yeah, I made an investment, a financial investment, but instead of a compassionate Jesus, we ended up with a Jesus with a machine gun.
Now remember, we said the pastors have authority in the church over members' lives and over their money. And how do pastors obtain their place in the pyramid? Our investigation found it doesn't take formal religious schooling. New pastors are chosen by current pastors and then personally ordained by the sole power of Wayman Mitchell.
Margie, unbelievable. Now, I know the church members wouldn't go on camera, current church members. How about the church itself? Any response to all this?
Well, not to me, but we're told that the church congregations were told about our stories from the pulpit as soon as they were made public. They were told Channel 7 is serving the devil, and our stories are proof that the devil is angry about the church's good works. Now, theoretically, the people in the churches wouldn't have seen our stories since they're taught that television is unacceptable.